The statute says we got.
Right, yeah, somebody over it. But if we have to find, if we have to prove that there is.
Only if I have talked to you like that.
It may be, I don't know, I'm just trying to, like I said, I'm just trying to get myself on the foot for the.
Yeah,
Trying to raise it.
that's really.
Argument theory. Yeah, I just thought about it all the way over it.
I was gonna make some calls.
Do you want that map down here now? Do you want the survey here now?
No, we can Kevin sign that afterwards.
Okay.
No.
Chris, did you have positive responses from most people today?
Yeah, I didn't get a response from Dina. The only person that said they wouldn't be here was Sean Cobby.
So. Sean and Josh are ready to head out of town.
Oh, yeah.
Place up there by the building, building.
Yeah.
Right knocked down.
Yeah.
Bryce coming?
He said he was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I'll call the meeting of the Rensselaer Advisory Plan Commission to order. Josh, would you proceed with the roll call?
Yes.
President Kevin Arnold.
Here.
Councilman Jeff Rayburn. Here. Dina Rule. Bryce Black. Cliff Wood. Here. Sean Covey. Mike Davis. Here. Scott Barton. Here.
The first item on the agenda is election of a vice president. I'll open the floor to any discussion or nominations.
I would nominate Jeff Rayburn.
Second to that nomination.
Okay.
Any other nominee? You want to take it?
Yeah.
Any other nominations?
Move to close.
Close nominations. All those in favor of Jeff Rayburn as vice president of the Planning Commission signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? New VP. Congratulations. You all have the minutes of the last two meetings. We'll start with the meetings of the regular, or the minutes of the regular meeting on January 16th. Any discussion or corrections to the minutes? Having none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the January 16th meeting.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the January 16th meeting. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Also have this minutes from the special meeting on January 27th. I will entertain a motion to approve that.
So moved.
Second. It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes of the January 27th meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Minutes approved. Whole business. Update on zoning and subdivision control meeting schedule. Josh, you want to give an update on the process?
Yeah, so, been to the city council twice now. And we elected to table it at the last Monday's meeting. We'll have it on the agenda again next Monday. They just wanted some further breakdown of comparison between the other places in the county. So I have a spreadsheet. I didn't provide it to everybody because I'm not quite finished with it yet. I've been compiling over the last week of Rensselaer, DeMont, Wheatfield, Remington, and then the county in general. Also, I put Tippecanoe County in there. It's difficult, as we found, like I've explained before. Everybody's zoning codes are so wildly different, and based on what they charge fees for, what they don't fee, it's very hard to compare everything apples to apples. But the best comparison we had, honestly, was with DeMont, though, and everything we're proposing is, for the most part, less than what DeMont already charges. Their fee schedule was established back in 2019. So.
And that was the question from the council when it was presented to the council, was how do we compare? Because really we're coming from virtually nothing in a lot of these categories.
Yeah.
So anything is a huge jump. So it's a bit of a shock to the system.
Yeah.
We're not looking for any.
No, I just want to give everybody an update on where that was at. So hopefully next month we'll have this fee schedule established, and I'll be presenting the finalized fee schedule.
Okay, next item is update on amendments.
Yes, so the special meeting, we had two amendments there. We had the text amendment and the zone map amendment. The text amendment has all been updated and published, in one of the other requirements for that text amendment for the addition of the simple subdivision and Plat committee to the zoning control ordinance was that they're required to be recorded with the county and given to the auditor's office. That's all been done. And that I met with Mary Sherrick in the county office today about that, trying to come up with a way to help better control that with the auditor's office so we can monitor splits being done and stuff like that, so we don't run into as many issues, hopefully in the future, of things not being properly approved by the plan commission and then not being able to issue a building permit and just.
So it'll help us streamline the process and make sure things are being done.
Yeah, so now we have, everything's been with county. Technically, we have exclusive control over any splits or subdivisions or anything like that. But that's not the way it always just happens when people submit stuff to the county. If they accept it and do it, then we have a problem on our hands that we'll have to resolve in the future. But I'm trying to work with them to come up with some procedures to make those as few as possible.
So then maybe they'll have flags that go off. That
Yes.
They know they need to contact us.
Right, yeah. I talked with Mary. She said it's hit or miss with her office, but for the most part, a lot of times when they get something, they reach out to her. So I'm just trying to get the same thing set up for the city.
And I'll add to that, that's because I'm familiar with Newton County because of some of the work I do over there. They require approval from the local planning jurisdiction if it's in the extraterritorial or whether it's there or not, or they'll approve the split. So that's, I think, very appropriate.
Okay. Any other discussion or questions?
Oh, and then I did update the map too. If you can see on your little one down there in the lower right-hand corner, you see a little speck of green on your maps down there in the blue. That's the rezone we did. Or they would probably
Out in the middle of it.
All right.
Just ruin everything.
Yeah. So that is up to date on Beacon's website too, if you were to get on there. So.
Interesting to look at that way when you have the whole map.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Josh on that item? Okay, we'll move on to new business discussion topics. The first is the expansion of extraterritorial jurisdiction, buffer zone.
Okay, Todd may have something to say about procedural wise. I talked with Mary when I was out there today. As far as she's aware in the past, whenever the city's kind of expanded the buffer zone within their allowable 2-mile limit, they're just kind of allowed to do it. There's nothing that the county really signs off on. But as far as I talked to her, it would be something if we do this, we will definitely, probably submit it to their plan commission to review for comments ahead of us ever having a public hearing or anything like that. But the main reason for this, if you, on your map there or a map up on the screen, the area is shaded, kind of grayed out or darker there. Those parcels in those areas are within our 2-mile buffer limit. Right now, we don't exercise any zoning jurisdiction there. We've never applied them an actual Rensselaer zone, but we could. One of the reasons we're looking at doing this is we're trying to create a new joint TIF area around I-65 area with the county. And part of the area we're looking at doing that in, right now, the zoning would be controlled by the county versus us. So it generally makes sense to get it all under one plan commission's jurisdiction because they're involved in those redevelopment decisions as far as approvals for developmental plans and stuff like that. As far as Mary's concerned, if we did this, this actually would give us planning and building code authority in those new areas, and it would help alleviate some just administrative work by the county too. So she always tells me take as much as you want. I don't know if we want to do the whole 360 and expand as far as we want around the city there, or we would just focus on that area west of town. But I just want to provide you guys with the map at this point. I think we need to have, if we are going to expand those areas, we need to zoom into them and look at them, how they're currently zoned in the county and what we think they need to be zoned as far as future planning goes, how we want to come up with a map before we start discussing any type of actual hearing. Yeah, the darkest area.
Wouldn't it be wise to be proactive and figure out how you're gonna zone that?
Yes, so that would be part, yeah. So part of ever having a public hearing or something, we'll probably meet a couple more times and talk about any areas we're interested in expanding and actually what zones we want to put a map onto those areas and everything like that. So as this map, as you can see right here, it's a little bit different than if you were to click it on Beacon and look. What I've actually done with this map is I went into the parcel layer and actually assigned a zoning classification based on our map to every parcel in the county. It's one of the updates I'm trying to do with the county to get it and also get it affixed on the property card when you pull that up on Beacon to where it actually will show that you're under the Rensselaer Plan Commission's jurisdiction and what you're zoned according to our map. That it will help eliminate a lot of confusion, because right now if you click on the property card, it just says, sometimes it'll say Rensselaer, sometimes most of the time it just says buffer zone. So that should be hopefully something we can get updated in very soon.
So those areas, west of 65 on 114 that you have listed as B2.
Yes.
That is how it is, or that's just something we did to.
No, that's how it is. How it is. Anything that's got a
So what,
color that's already zoned. Yes.
okay, so what areas are you talking about then? You would want to help control.
So for the most part, if we were to expand, what the main area I'd be looking at is kind of, see my cursor here, this big area right here to the northwest, and then this area to the southwest. Those are the main areas I think we need to look at taking on. There's not a whole lot of development. You can go to the area to the southwest. There's a lot of that falls in the floodplain jurisdiction, but it would still just help out the county in that regard.
The new utilities are gonna go into the blue, not the brown, aren't they? When you cross under the interstate.
Yes, yeah, they will, yeah.
If we were to decide to expand, does that require commissioner approval, do you think, through the county, or?
No, it's really just us redoing the zone map and having a public hearing or anything like that. Like I said, as a courtesy, I would, I think it'd be good for us to take it to their plan commission, have them review it based on where it's already zoned. Make sure they don't see any issues before we have our public hearing on doing it, but.
The point would be that then the city would be able to say how things were zoned.
Yeah,
It looks to me from the statute, like if the county adopted a comprehensive plan after a certain date in 2019, that they would have to approve it and pass some type of an ordinance, but their comp plan was adopted well ahead of that.
okay.
And so I've got to go through the statute again. I mean, there's a lot of moving back and forth.
I'm sure.
On some of these between code sections even, so.
Okay,
My question about the buffer zone, technically all this is Rensselaer's buffer zone. Why are we picking and choosing just a couple areas instead of doing everything that is the city's technical buffer?
We could, it just puts more burden on my office really to take on.
I understand that. It just seems like the little shaded areas out to the east, north and south, we're not really care about them because we know that there might be construction in these other ones. And we definitely want that. My opinion is if we're gonna take the areas we know of land construction, then we should technically do it all because it is the city's buffer zone.
Which I would agree with that. Yeah, I would agree with that, which is fine. Most of it is just gonna be
I
as much as you
yeah.
can see, so it's not like it's gonna be.
Right, and. But yeah, you get the appearance of that, well, we only want the say of what we know might get built in. But technically, it is all of the city's buffer zone, so we should be
Yes.
doing all of it instead of cherry picking each certain areas.
Should be letting people know how we want it zoned before they decide to build there.
And fairly and evenly from the word go.
I'm not sure why they would stop at certain places before. I don't know. So
Oh, I understand, I just think it was just missed and just not done. We should do it now, or work on doing it now. Just for that, I mean, I'd rather be above board than come in later and say, oh, man, you can't do that because that is our technical area.
yeah, I mean, to your point, it's not going to be that much more work to figure out the zone for the rest of those. Because like I said, most of it's all just going to be
Most of it's agricultural.
we're going to have to spend the time figuring out zones is going to be on the west.
Yes.
No other downside to this, Todd?
You don't see any other downside to doing this over?
No, I just agree with Josh, and maybe more work to take on, but there again, if I understand it right, and I just reviewed this stuff today, I've been out of town for 4 or 5 days, but it's the gray area on the outside that's actually with the 2 miles.
Right.
From all the city limits, and I believe we would have to amend our comprehensive plans. I think we have to identify that buffer zone in the comp plan, the way I read it.
Okay.
And so, yeah, if you know you may want to do it all, it's kind of along with what Scott said, you might as well address it all at once.
Okay.
It may take a little longer to get it done, I understand that, but like I said, on the west side, the business side and what everything. You concentrate in certain areas and say, oh, heck with the rest. To me, it just doesn't sit right.
I think the rest of it fall in place pretty easy after you got that figured out.
Yeah, I like I said, I do understand we'll do a little more work, but if we have to add it to the comprehensive plan, is that what you're saying, Todd?
I believe so. I'll look more into it and establish along with Josh step-by-step procedure, what we have to do along the way. It did at first glance seem almost like it was too easy though. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think we do have to certify to the county, even if they don't have to approve it, that we.
I think that's a great idea to keep the county abreast of what we are finishing, after since all this other annexation was done throughout the years.
Yeah.
That's a good idea to keep that relationship.
Yeah, and I'm a big proponent of keeping everything above board, just do it evenly and fairly.
Everybody knows what's going on, and So what's the first step in the process if this direction?
I'll just know what I'll do is I'll work with Todd. I'm coming up with a procedure, but I'll go ahead and just like that, I'll go ahead and start assigning zoning districts to the areas and bring it back to you to start having discussions on it and see what you guys think, And then too, with what we're doing with the county on, that tip area, how they want things to develop, keep them involved in that area specifically to see what they think about what we're talking about too. So.
If we do have to amend the comprehensive plan, because I believe that this area has to be designated in the comp plan, then we'll have to look at, that's a whole process in and of itself. So that will go along with this. And there may be public hearing involved in that, I think.
There is. I know we just did it, and I know it calls out for itself how it so.
That's one more meeting.
Yeah.
You're talking about a lot of landowners too for a public hearing,
Yeah.
a lot of notices. But we don't need to take any action in order to move to the next step.
No. Like I said, at this time, until we're ready to have a public hearing, this is all just us meeting and talking. So.
Everybody feel about it.
The first step, we're doing it right now.
Yeah, I think it's a worthy thing to move forward and see where we can get with it.
Okay.
Any other discussion on that? Next item is zoning text amendment, variance of use.
You guys saw in your packet there, I was talking with Todd about it before the meeting, so I know he'll have some comments here. One of the issues I have right now is our code doesn't define when somebody needs to apply for rezone versus just asking for a variance. So that's where I'm kind of coming from with this. I believe there's some case law that defines it, the difference between, when a variance technically is more considered a spot rezone than it is a variance, and that technically can be thrown out. So what I'm looking for with what I provided you there is just is trying to keep a variance only being granted to something that is also already allowed in that like category of uses. So like what business uses versus residential uses, industrial uses. So if you're trying to get a variance for an industrial use, but you're in a residential zone, for me to say no, that doesn't work. You have to rezone first. So I looked at putting that in there as kind of the first condition on that the DZA would have to approve. Just give me something to put in the code there to say that that use is already permitted or an accessory use in that district category. If you can't pass that, then it's not even worth trying to get a variance, So,
Well, my concern when I looked at this, and I completely understand Josh's point because that's exactly the type of issue that comes up, was whether we could amend our code to add this finding as part of these, because these aren't just part of our code. They come out of the state statute, the enabling statutes that actually create these boards. There was case law years ago that gave authority to municipalities and counties to regulate zoning. But also there's a doctrine that says, it's called ultra various. You can't go beyond your authority. And without doing a little bit more research, I've looked at some case law too that's not directly on point, but I was concerned it might be constructive on this. That suggests that we may not be able to add an additional requirement or additional finding before we could grant a variance, because the statute has already said you must find these 5 things. We're adding a 6th. I don't know if that goes beyond the authority of this board, but I want to research that a little bit. And I think that was just for discussion time anyway. I mean, the idea is, good, I believe. But whether we can actually put it in the code here or, make it a consideration. I mean, my concern is the legislature said, state legislature, that you have to consider these 5 things, and you can only approve it upon a determination in writing that these 5 things exist, that you found them. The approval won't be injurious to the public health, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We're adding something to that. So could someone say, well, that's unconstitutional or ultra various, it goes beyond what this board is authorized to require of me? I mean, if you had a situation where those 5, there was a positive finding on them, but it doesn't fit in one of these categories, then it's automatically going to be denied. And I guess that brings to mind too, in a let's say an abbreviated tech review of an application, you'd be able to pick that out pretty quick. Right. So it would almost like be, we're not even going to take your application now because you don't meet that requirement. It would be impossible for the board to find that this use is a permitted conditional or whatever in that zoning category, like residential, business, commercial, whatever. If it's not permitted, you don't really go any further.
Right.
I can see someone appealing that.
In that regard, would it make more sense to put it kind of like in the application, not in the findings, but in the application side of applying for a variance on the description of how to apply?
Yeah, well, in what way? Just,
It's just, because there's things like building plan requirements and different things like that. It's just like a condition on the.
You say so the applicant would
Yeah, just
know
that-
ahead of time whether they can,
Yeah.
what they need to do.
right, that it wouldn't be a finding of the board, but it would be a requirement of the application. In order to apply, it has to be.
if I was arguing on the other side, I'd say you just found another way to make it, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Without putting it somewhere where that was impermissible. And I'm not giving the opinion right now that it's impermissible. I want to do a little bit more digging on it. I just started looking at this stuff today. Yeah, I would have some real concerns that were, it goes back to the whole reason for a variance. Then I guess if I was an applicant, I'd say, well, can I get a variance from that requirement? Because that's what a variance is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So to be clear, what you're talking about is, if you can't, what you're saying is, we would want to make it so that you can't get a variance for something that doesn't already fit into that zone, permitted.
Right, yeah.
And I kind of, to be clear, I misread that at first. And I asked Josh, I said, well, why would someone ask for a variance if it was already, permitted, a conditional permit could be granted, or it was an accessory or temporary structure allowed in that district? And he pointed out, no, I mean, the district category, like there's R1, R2, R3, that's a residential category, I think is what the intent was. And it would allow something to be approved as a variance, if I understood Josh right, in an R1 that may actually require an R2 zoning. Which would trigger you to say, well, you need to rezone it to R2. Right, it'll be approved.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I get the thought. I just want to make sure we're not going beyond what our statutory authority is.
Rather than somebody going for a variance, they would need to go for a reason.
Right.
And then it can be,
See,
you could get rezoned to industrial if you would.
Right, that's just a
Really
much more in-depth process to rezone it versus asking for a variance.
it's more of a process, and there's more likelihood probably for disapproval because of spot zoning and.
So that's why people would not apply for rezoning instead of a variance. It's more difficult.
Yeah, it's more time consuming, I believe, because it's got to go through the plan commission and as well as the legislative body, the city council.
I was thinking Josh told me it was also a longevity thing. If somebody sells a property later, it's zoned, or if it's a variance, it might not stay that way after you sell the property. The guy might be on the hook.
I believe that would be just however the variance is approved.
Yeah, I mean, there's certain things you can approve to
Most of our variances go with that owner.
It depends on
Just the-
developmental variances would be forever because they're a development, but a use variance, the determination that when it's approved, whether it's stated to the owner or the property. So,
Seems like mostly that's what we've done.
yeah,
So that, the thing we were talking about was that state highway place, Cooper's building rentals on, because you only got a variance instead of a rezone, so. Or you could sell that later and automatically know it stays in building.
yeah.
well, yeah. The other thing, you get a variance for typically a particular project. If you rezone to industrial or whatever, then you open it up to whatever is permitted in there. So sometimes there's a reason on city side of things where you'd rather grant a variance than a rezone.
Yeah.
It's pretty fact intensive, project intensive. From one to the other, whether you can, or at least from my perspective, you would comment that, yeah, this would be more appropriate for a rezone, or you should just get a variance because we don't really want those other types of activities. We understand what you want to do for this use, but we wouldn't want to open it up to all these other permitted uses per se. in that zone classification. But in some, I often would argue that why don't you just rezone it if that's what you want to do? Especially if you're trying to think of a hypothetical where you may want to put a less intense or less restrictive use in a zone that would require, or in a zone that would permit more intense uses. Is it good to say, well, I want to build a house here, real close to this factory? Is that a good idea? Probably not. And they're not going to rezone that little chunk to a, residential versus industrial if it's in the middle of an industrial park or something like that. So, yeah, I understand the desire for adding something like that. I just want to make sure we can do it. It's like, it often comes up, I've heard it in other boards, why don't we just pass an ordinance that says you can't do this here? Some of these controversial projects, because you can't zone things out of existence in your area. You can only restrict them reasonably. That's what the law says. This not in my backyard stuff just doesn't, apply legally.
Anything else on zoning? Next item is Plan Commission meeting rules.
I don't know if you wanted to talk about this, but I just kind of provided an example here from other meeting rule packet I have about, order of business and just hearing procedures and stuff like that. So I didn't know.
Well, I think it's a good idea to have procedures and meeting rules, but because right now the way it sits with most of our boards is just up to however you operate. I mean, no bylaws or anything that tells us how we need to operate. So just in my experience, I've found it more helpful to have procedures for your meetings. You do things in a certain order and that kind of stuff, and it's all you operate a little easier and everybody knows what's going on. And one of the things that keeps coming to my mind, and when I was on the city council and then on this board, that I was on the school board for 4 years too, and we would always have to approve the agenda before we even got into it, because there might be additions or deletions if something happened, that day. And that way of operating always made sense to approve the agenda before you even went into it. So I don't know, like Todd, from your perspective, what do you think?
I've only seen that with school boards too.
No, you're right.
That's unique. but that's the only place I've seen it. I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but I don't know if it's a requirement for them to approve the agenda. I've kind of wondered, but I've never looked into it. There's certain things, for these boards, if you have a public hearing on an agenda, you can't disapprove of that public hearing. It's already been announced and everything like that. But the additions and deletions makes a lot of sense, because I think that should be, and maybe it's required to be, I'd have to look further into it to refresh my memory, something that's done ahead of time. So, and that's typically what I've seen at the school boards is, we want to add this or just an announcement that we're going to delete that. And that's probably during the approval process, because things do come up that weren't timely, but they need to be addressed. And as long as there's a record made that we're adding that to the agenda, I think that's appropriate.
So is that partially to help control special interest kind of things? Somebody that got elected to the board on some big issue and might be the only one that wants to talk about that, but it might take all night or something like that.
I can see that as a good example. That wasn't on our meeting agenda.
Yeah.
So we're not going to address it.
And I know in reviewing this set of rules, one of the other things to consider, and if you see in parentheses there, any considerations of requesting continuances, it also allowed an opportunity for, say, somebody was up for a public hearing, but for some reason they weren't ready to present, that they could, before the meeting starts, ask for their public meeting to be continued, so it didn't have to be held and voted down just basically because they needed a continuance. They weren't fully ready. So that was another way to put that kind of relief in there for a petitioner as well.
So they wouldn't have to get permission on it.
Yeah, so basically before the meeting start, they would ask for their hearing to be continued, you know.
But then every process would start over with public notice. And
No, it'd be continued at that time, but if they didn't ask for that and they came up in the meeting, they couldn't ask for a continuance.
Okay.
That kind of meeting, have to ask it before the meeting starts, basically, so.
Yeah, if that's the one thing, if you do the continuance properly during the public meeting, then they don't have to re-advertise and all that and incur all that additional expense. But you have to say it's continued until such date and such time for it to be a valid continuance. So even if you didn't have, that's the one thing that comes up sometimes, even if you didn't have anything else on the agenda, you can't bump that back to the next month's meeting without actually holding that public meeting just for that purpose.
right.
That's how it becomes the public meetings.
Yeah.
Yeah, yes. Because if they got the first notice, it's up to the public or the person receiving the notice to keep track of what's going on in the process. And if they come to that next meeting that it was continued to, because they had notice at the first meeting, then due process has been complied with.
Double-edged sword too.
Yeah, sounds like it.
Yes, that, I can see where a petitioner that's a controversial issue can come right before the meeting because finds out there's a whole bunch of people that's going on Mont Street, ask for a continuance. And then all the people try to, hopefully some petitioners or Mont Streeters will not show up on the next one.
Well, and
I
I
can see
think,
where that can be very tough.
and maybe through these rules and procedures that are authorized by statute, you could indicate the types of criteria you would look at to grant a continuance.
Look at it, just a blank sheet. Yeah, you asked for it, you get it. I think that's all.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like in practicing in the courts. A lot of times there's a pass on a first continuance, but you need reasons.
Right.
And anything beyond that, most of the judges, and that's kind of what you would role this board would be, this commission. They want to see reasons why you're continuing something that they took the time to put on their agenda and show up for. And just because there was a big crowd one way or another, probably.
That's what I'm saying. I can see where that could be.
But we don't have to grant the continuance.
Correct.
But on the other side of things also, I've often wondered whether it would be a good idea to allow a petitioner an automatic continuance if they show up and all we have here is a quorum. And which sometimes creates a situation where you have to have a unanimous approval vote to get anything passed.
Right.
So I've seen situations where I thought that wasn't totally fair to a petitioner, but it was in compliance with the existing law. So
Double-edged sword.
yeah,
I think the 3-minute rule that they have in here for public comment that's typical of those board, whether you hold them to it or not. Yeah, sometimes that's tough to do. And my thought on something like that is it might be easier if we did that to have Josh or Crystal or, somebody that's not sitting up here take time and then 3 minutes goes off, Crystal yells time and you're done. She's nodding. She's in agreement.
She could just raise her hand for
That's
having
true.
a seat.
That's true. Yeah. Anything else on, you guys had time to read through this, but.
I can retype this up in ours. I just want to provide an example of what we were discussing. We're not looking to approve this by any means tonight, so.
Well, how about if we come up with a list of things like this that maybe would pertain to this board and then
Okay.
send that out, and then we can have another discussion on that, whether you want to do it or not.
And I personally, I'm just a lawyer. I don't vote on this commission, obviously, but I think the rules and procedures are good for these meetings.
Mhm.
You can control what you like, that 3 minute, whether it's 3 minutes or you decide on something else. You want to be still reasonable. I've seen 3 minutes. I've seen 5 minutes. The presentation of, evidence for or against a project, let's say how that's to be done. We're not going to allow, for instance, somebody to say, well, here's what my neighbor wrote. And get that into the record. How do we know your neighbor wrote that?
Right.
That's always irritated me as an attorney. But it happens, and you can kind of control that with your meeting procedures. And, you're gonna have people to say, well, I didn't know that was a rule. Well, if you want to be involved in this process, something you got to ask questions.
Yeah.
I've always said, a lot of folks show up and they don't have really any input to provide to the hearing process. They just want to ask questions to get answers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
They can get a hold of his office to get a copy of the application or whatever, what it's about, clarification. I see that happen a lot in these public meetings and have these folks known ahead of time or done the homework ahead of time. Sometimes they don't have time for that, I get it. But they may have gotten their answer because I've seen a lot of them walk away. I'm referring to a lot of county meetings I've attended. We're saying, oh, okay, if I'd known that, I wouldn't have come tonight. You could have found out.
Yeah, that brings up another thought to me. If someone comes up and public comment and asks us a question or looks for answers, I mean, we're not obligated to give them anything.
You're really not here to provide answers. It's a public hearing. They're to provide information and evidence to you and support, in remonstrance or, whatever on this project, so you can make an intelligent decision, and make these findings, whatever.
It's not for, I'm against it, talk me out of it.
Yeah. And legitimately, there's some questions that are asked of applicants sometimes on these big projects. Well, what's your intention here? How many buildings are you going to put up? This and that. Sometimes everything's not in an application. And I've heard questions asked that if I was sitting on the board, I'd go, that's something I didn't think of. I'm glad they asked it. And typically the applicant should be forthright and everything what I've seen willing to, answer those things. But yeah, they shouldn't, it's not for the board to provide answers to them.
Right.
I mean, could you maybe before the meeting announce to the public, that we have an agenda and, to avoid, somebody trying to get off track or.
Well, I'm referring to more of it in a public hearing on a matter that's already on the agenda.
Okay.
I've just seen a lot of times, and it's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen. But some of these folks don't realize they could contact the building commissioner's office and get some of these answers right from Josh or right from Crystal, or they can, they can, it's public record, these applications and things. They can come in and examine that stuff, which would answer a lot of questions sometimes.
Yeah, most of the questions I get are just people, when they get their due notice letter, they don't know what it means, and I just explain it, and they just say, oh, okay, I'm not worried about that, and that's it, so.
Right.
One thing that I'd like to see, that we require, and we've done this a little bit on city council, that would be if somebody comes up and wants to go about straight against something, they need to state their name and their address.
Yes, I like that
If
too.
they're not a citizen of our community, I don't think they should be wasting their time.
Yeah.
If somebody, is out in the county, lives out in the county and they want to come complain about something that we're talking about that doesn't directly affect them, I don't think we should give them an audience, but
They go to county meeting.
Courthouse across the street.
well, I mean, that's.
I know what you're saying though.
Yes, when we were at that, AIM Summit back in January, last year. I thought that was a really nice, wonderful day.
Yeah.
We're here to represent the citizens of Pennsylvania, not, you know, right, everybody in the vote.
I think that's how the council and the commissioners on the county side do it.
Yeah.
They require name and address.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, you can certainly do that. Just, there are times when, but they should announce it, when someone who may not live here has kind of been engaged, or whether they're doing it for pay or for, you know, just gratuitously presented information to the boards on behalf of residents.
Yeah.
But every time I've seen that happen, they said, I want to hear, whether they're a lawyer or someone else. Sometimes it's just a knowledgeable individual. We had a lot of that with the wind farm stuff and solar, where they would come and present statistics and evidence and stuff on behalf of other groups that were citizens here.
Other thing we've done too is had a sign-up sheet. If you're interested in speaking, sign up with your name and address, and then the president or chairman or whoever would have that, and then call them up, you know, in order when they signed up. And a lot of times, once you get to them and you call their name, they don't want to get up. So that's another option.
Yeah, maybe their concerns have already been addressed prior to them, you know. So.
We could get pretty detailed with it, but I'm just interested in writing a book, but
Well, we could always have, it's always at our discretion to.
Yeah.
The actual meeting.
yeah. Okay. Anything else on that? I guess we can work a little bit and get something a little more tailored to this board presented, so we can have another discussion about it. The next item is zoning enforcement procedures.
Yes, so I sent you guys, the ordinance that was passed in 2008 along with the zoning ordinance about, zoning violations. And tonight I provided you just with a sample copy of like a warning violation or warning ticket I sent out for, one last week. But technically what our code calls for is, when I find a violation, they get 14 days to correct the issue before we can actually cite them for it. And then it calls for the first day, it's $50 per violation that they were cited for. Second day, 100, third day, 150, fourth day, and every day after, $250 per violation. But in that first 10 days after they receive the notice, they have the ability to file for a petition. Like if they need a variance, if they file for a variance or conditional use, that would actually put them in, if it was granted, put them in compliance. That actually stays the whole situation until that's resolved by the DPA.
So if they correct the problem within the 14 days, then
It's done, yeah,
no fees are issued.
yeah. But those fines are daily, so like I said, it doesn't take much for that. Like in this situation, that would accumulate by the fourth day to $2,000 a day. That would
That up pretty quick.
Yeah.
A lot of cars.
And that gives us, you know, I mean, at that time, especially in this situation, I think, I mean, with Todd, we'd be trying to go file something with the county as quickly as possible, but until it's granted, that, you know, that's gonna.
Have they corrected this particular one yet?
I had, when I went by the end of last week, they hadn't done anything yet, but I believe Crystal said the property owner, they live out of town, as you can see out here.
It's just a tenant.
Called in about getting somebody to come in and tow them, you know, so.
Yeah, so by sending a letter to the owner that kind of helps like the fire.
Right, yeah, I sent a letter to the owner, I posted this letter and everything on a car there, and, you know, I got a call from the person selling the cars there pretty instantaneously, you know, telling me, well, I need your permission for, I have permission from the property owner, but that's why I sent this to the property owner too, because they're the ones that are ultimately going to receive the fine, so.
Yeah, and the tenant's not gonna tell them.
Yeah. But I just wanted to make you guys aware of that procedure. If you see things, please reach out to me and let me know so I can send these letters, but it's not something we have the ability to give them 2 days to fix, you know, it's a process. And normally in this situation too, in other things like if they come into my office and ask for a time extension, I'm gonna write down an agreement with them and grant it versus just start finding it. You know, I'm gonna work with them as much as I can to resolve it without having to do anything first. So, but this just gives us the teeth that they refuse to comply. So,
If you need this landlord to help you.
right, yeah.
I think that's the right way to do it too, especially in a smaller community. I mean, we've all got to live together too, so
Yeah.
um,
But that too,
you
I
want to hold them to the zoning code, but I mean, you also need to give a little grace too.
well, and two,
Your neighbors probably don't like it very well
Well,
either.
I'm sure they don't.
Yeah.
I'm sure they don't.
and Todd can probably speak to this too, but my purpose of granting that first extension or any extension after that is to provide another paper trail. If we do have to take into court that to show the city has done everything possible, they agreed to it, they still didn't do it, here, this, here, you know, from time to time again,
Right.
you know, so.
Good. Anything else on the zoning procedures?
Nope, I just wanted to give you an update on our little discussion on that, so.
Okay, committee reports. You got the Plat committee meeting.
Yep, so, provided you with the minutes there, we elected, Scott as president, and since Todd wasn't able to be there, we made him vice president. But we went ahead and approved that central subdivision split for Fenwick's. The timeframe for appeals has passed, so Kevin will have you sign off on that. On that survey today and let Sheldon know that you can come pick that up and get it recorded with the county. So.
Okay. Okay, next public comment. I see we have no public here, so there's no public comment. Announce the next meeting first. Next meeting is Thursday, March 20th at 5:30. Been motioned and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor, say aye. Say aye. Aye. Won't get warm.
I can't match any of the colors.
By the time they zoom in, it gets a little hairy and,
I didn't get it until I looked at this one.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what he's
I
saying.
kept saying, what gray? What are you talking about
Yeah.
gray? This is brown. Make it better with Xerox machine?
Oh.
this is, well, the actual map itself is 4 foot by 2 foot or